The conference room door stood half open when I passed by, and through that narrow gap I heard my own words coming back to me. The voice wasn't mine. It belonged to someone else, someone speaking with the kind of confidence that comes from believing a thing was always theirs. The predictive modeling engine adapts in real time based on user interaction patterns, the voice said. It learns behavior, anticipates needs, and adjusts workflows before the user even realizes there's friction. I stopped walking. My hand tightened around the coffee cup I'd been carrying back to my desk. Those were my exact words. Not paraphrased. Not interpreted. Word for word, pulled from a presentation I had delivered 18 months ago to a room of investors who didn't understand half of what I was saying but nodded anyway because the numbers looked promising. I stepped closer to the doorway just enough to see inside without being seen. Standing at the front of the room, backlit by the projection screen, was Derek Chamberlain, the new Chief Executive Officer. 6 months into the role and already acting like he'd been here since the beginning. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his hand moved in broad, sweeping gestures as he spoke, painting a picture of innovation and vision for the 12 board members seated in crisp rows before him. Behind him on the screen was a slide I recognized immediately. My slide. The layout, the font choices, the specific phrasing in the bullet points. It was all mine. I had built that deck during a week when I barely slept, fueled by cold pizza and the desperate need to prove that what we were building wasn't just functional, it was revolutionary. My name wasn't on it anymore. I should introduce myself properly. My name is Liana Whitaker. I'm 41 years old, though some mornings I feel closer to 60. For the past 9 years I've been the lead architect and head of product innovation at Luxel Systems, a healthcare data analytics company that started in a cramped office above a dry cleaner in Portland and grew into something that now occupies 3 floors of a downtown high-rise. I didn't just work here. I built the foundation. I designed the system that every hospital, clinic, and insurance provider now relies on to process patient data, track treatment outcomes, and predict resource allocation with terrifying accuracy. I wrote the first version of the algorithm in my apartment on a laptop that overheated if I ran it for more than 2 hours. I filed the provisional patent application on a Sunday afternoon while eating leftover Chinese food and wondering if any of it would ever matter. It mattered. But somewhere along the way, between the funding rounds and the board meetings and the hiring of executives who spoke in corporate jargon instead of code, I became invisible. Not irrelevant, never irrelevant, but easy to overlook. Easy to forget when it was time to hand out credit. Derek was still talking. He clicked to the next slide and I felt my stomach tighten. It was the system architecture diagram. The one I had drawn by hand first on a whiteboard in a conference room that no longer existed, back when we were still calling ourselves a startup and pretending that sleeping under our desks was a choice rather than a necessity. This is the core of what makes Luxel different, Derek said, his voice smooth and practiced. This infrastructure doesn't just collect data. It interprets it. It predicts complications before they happen. It saves lives. He wasn't wrong. The system did save lives. I knew because I'd received emails from doctors and nurses who told me so. But hearing him describe it like he understood the architecture, like he'd been there when I was debugging the recursive loops at 3 a.m, made something cold settle in my chest. I took a step back from the doorway. I didn't want to be seen. Not yet. Not like this, holding a coffee cup and standing in a hallway like I didn't belong in the room where my own work was being presented. A voice spoke quietly beside me. I turned and found Chloe standing there, her arms crossed, her expression somewhere between pity and guilt. Chloe had been my intern 3 years ago. Bright, eager, quick to learn. Now she worked as Derek's executive assistant, which meant she spent most of her time managing his calendar, preparing his slides, and pretending not to notice when he took credit for things he didn't create. "You're not in there?" Chloe asked, though it was clear from her tone that she already knew the answer. I gave her a small, tight smile. Apparently not. She looked toward the conference room, then back at me. Her jaw tightened. "I thought you were supposed to lead this presentation. Derek told me yesterday that you'd be co-presenting." "Plans change," I said quietly. Chloe didn't respond, but I could see the discomfort in the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. He knew. Everyone knew. They just didn't know what to do about it. I didn't linger. I turned and walked back toward my office, my footsteps muted by the plush carpet that had been installed last year during the rebranding phase, which was really just a fancy way of saying we'd raised enough money to stop looking like a scrappy startup and start looking like a company that rich people could trust. My office was small, tucked into a corner of the building with a window that overlooked a parking garage. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Or at least it had been. I set my coffee down on the desk and opened my laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing my inbox. 37 unread emails. Most of them were automatic notifications, system updates, internal memos about policies I'd already read. But one email stood out. The subject line was blank. The sender was listed as Calendar Sync. I clicked it open. Meeting invitation, Liana Whitaker. Time *1 p.m. Location *conference room 7B. Attendees Derek Chamberlain, Allison Pritchard, Human Resources. Subject none. There was no agenda. No explanation. Just a cold, sterile notification that I was expected to show up in less than 2 hours for a meeting with the CEO and someone from HR. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my mind already connecting the dots. You don't get called into a meeting with the CEO and HR without a subject line unless the subject is you. And when a company is about to finalize a $1.56 billion merger with one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country, you don't keep people around who might complicate things. I closed the laptop slowly. My hands were steady, but my heartbeat wasn't. I'd known this was coming. Not today specifically, but soon. I'd felt it in the way Derek started excluding me from strategy meetings, the way my input was suddenly noted instead of implemented, the way Chloe started apologizing for things that weren't her fault. But knowing something is coming doesn't make it easier when it arrives. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of my office. It was mostly empty now, cleared out over the last few months as I quietly started taking things home. Books on system architecture. Framed photos from the early days. A coffee mug someone had given me as a joke that said, "I survived another meeting that should have been an email." Behind the books, tucked into a slim folder that hadn't been touched in years, was a document I'd almost forgotten about. I pulled it out and opened it carefully, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. United States Patent and Trademark Office. Patent application #US 10,472,839 Title Adaptive Healthcare Data Processing System with Predictive Response Algorithms. Inventor Liana Whitaker. Filing date March 14, 2016. Status active. I'd filed this patent 9 years ago, back when Luxel Systems was still called something else, back when we were 5 people sharing a single office space and splitting the cost of a coffee machine. I'd paid for the filing fees myself. I'd written the claims myself. I'd done it quietly without telling anyone, not because I was planning for this moment, but because I'd seen too many good people get erased from their own stories. I wanted to make sure that if something ever went wrong, if the company ever forgot where it came from, there would be a record. A piece of paper that said, this was mine. I made this. For years I let Luxel use the technology freely. I never asked for licensing fees. I never brought it up in contract negotiations. I believed in what we were building. I believed that if I did good work, if I kept my head down and focused on making the system better, the recognition would come naturally. I was wrong. I folded the patent document and slid it back into the folder. Then I placed the folder carefully into my bag along with my laptop and a few other things I knew I wouldn't be coming back for. At 12:58 p.m., I walked into conference room 7B. The meeting that changed everything. The room was smaller than the one where Derek had been presenting earlier. No windows. No projection screen. Just a plain wooden table, 6 chairs, and the kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Derek was already seated at the far end of the table, his suit jacket draped over the back of his chair. He looked relaxed, like this was just another item on his daily schedule. To his right sat Allison Pritchard, the Director of Human Resources. She was a woman in her early 50s with short gray hair and the kind of neutral expression that came from years of delivering bad news to people who didn't want to hear it. There was a manila folder on the table in front of her. My name was printed on the tab. "Liana," Derek said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "Thanks for coming. Please sit." I sat. I didn't say anything. I just folded my hands on the table and waited. Allison opened the folder and glanced down at the papers inside, though I had the distinct impression she'd already memorized whatever was written there. Liana, we wanted to meet with you today to discuss some organizational changes that are taking place as we move forward with the upcoming merger. I nodded. Still didn't speak. Derek leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. As you know, the merger with Obelisk Health is a significant milestone for Luxel. It's going to open up incredible opportunities for growth, expansion, and innovation. But it also means we need to be strategic about how we structure our teams moving forward. Strategic, I repeated softly. Exactly, Derek said, missing, or ignoring, the edge in my tone. We've been evaluating our leadership structure, and we've determined that some roles will be consolidated to streamline decision-making and improve efficiency. Allison picked up where he left off. After careful consideration, we've decided that your position as head of product innovation will be eliminated as part of this restructuring. There was clean, efficient, wrapped in corporate language that made it sound like a business decision instead of what it actually was. I looked at Derek. He met my gaze without flinching, though I noticed the way his fingers drummed lightly against the table, a small tell that he wasn't as comfortable as he wanted to appear. Eliminated, I said. Not reassigned. Not restructured. Eliminated. We're offering a generous severance package, Allison said quickly, sliding a stapled document across the table toward me. 3 months' salary, continuation of benefits for 6 months, and a letter of recommendation. I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at it, at the clean, sterile language that reduced 9 years of my life to a transaction. You're announcing the merger this afternoon, I said, my voice calm. The press release is going out at 4 o'clock. I saw the draft yesterday. Derek's expression didn't change, but I saw the slight tightening around his eyes. That's correct. And you're telling me this now. 2 hours before the announcement. We felt it was important to have this conversation before the news became public, Allison said. We wanted to give you time to process before I became a distraction, I finished for her. There was a brief silence. Allison glanced at Derek, who remained perfectly still. Liana, Derek said finally, his tone softer now, almost conciliatory. I want you to know that this decision wasn't personal. You've done incredible work here. But the reality is that as we integrate with Obelisk, we need leadership that aligns with their operational model. It's about fit, not performance. Fit, I echoed. Yes. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a soft scrape. I didn't pick up the severance package. I didn't shake Derek's hand. I just looked at him for a long moment and then I looked at Allison. I'll need to collect my things, I said. Of course, Allison replied. We've arranged for someone to escort you back to your office and assist with packing. Your access credentials will be deactivated at 5 o'clock today. I nodded. Then I walked out of the room without another word. ## what they didn't know. The hallway outside conference room 7B was empty. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the quiet, and I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from a distance. I'd expected this. I'd prepared for this. But there was still something surreal about the finality of it, the way 9 years could be reduced to a 15-minute conversation and a manila folder with my name on it. When I reached my office, I found Chloe standing in the doorway, her expression stricken. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. I didn't know they were going to. It's fine, I interrupted gently. It's not your fault. She looked like she wanted to say more, but I didn't give her the chance. I stepped past her into my office and closed the door. The space felt smaller now, like it had already started to forget I'd ever been here. I opened my desk drawers one by one, pulling out the few personal items I'd left behind. A flash drive with backup files. A notebook filled with handwritten notes from early design meetings. A photo of my team from 5 years ago, back when we still felt like a team. I packed everything into a small cardboard box that someone, probably Allison, had left on my desk for exactly this purpose. But before I left, I did one more thing. I opened my laptop, logged into the internal server, and navigated to a folder buried deep in the system architecture documentation. It was labeled Legacy Files, Archive Only, which meant most people assumed it was obsolete, not worth looking at. Inside that folder was a single file. I'd uploaded it 3 years ago and hadn't touched it since. System.pdf. It was the original design document for the predictive algorithm. Every line of logic. Every decision tree. Every edge case I'd accounted for. And at the bottom of the final page in small print was a note I'd added as an afterthought. Asterisk, this system architecture is protected under patent #US 10,472,839b2, filed by Liana Whitaker, March 2016. Unauthorized use, modification, or distribution without written consent of the patent holder is prohibited. I'd put it there as a safeguard, a quiet reminder that even if my name disappeared from presentations and press releases, it was still there in the code, in the structure, in the foundation of everything Luxel Systems had built. I downloaded a copy of the file to my flash drive, then logged out of the server for the last time. By the time I walked out of the building carrying my small box of belongings, it was 3:47 p.m. The press release would go live in 13 minutes. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I walked 3 blocks to a small coffee shop I used to visit during the early days, back when Luxel was still scrappy and uncertain. I ordered a black coffee, sat down by the window and pulled out my phone. At exactly 4 p.m. my phone buzzed with a notification. Breaking news. Luxel Systems announces $1.56 billion merger with Obelisk Health. I opened the article and skimmed through it. The usual corporate language. Strategic partnership. Innovative technology. Transformative impact on healthcare delivery. Halfway down the page there was a quote from Derek Chamberlain. Asterisk, this merger represents the culmination of years of groundbreaking work by our team. The predictive healthcare platform we've built is unlike anything else in the industry, and we're excited to bring it to a global scale through our partnership with Obelisk. Our team, our platform. Not a single mention of the person who had actually built it. I closed the article and set my phone down on the table. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd taken from my office. I opened it slowly, carefully, and looked down at the patent document. The official seal. The filing date. My name printed in bold letters at the top. Inventor, Liana Whitaker. They'd forgotten. Or maybe they'd never known. Either way, it didn't matter. Because the system they were selling for $1.56 billion, the platform they were promising to scale globally, the technology that Derek Chamberlain had just claimed as ours, it was mine. And they were about to find out. Hashtag the first move. I didn't call a lawyer immediately. I spent the rest of that evening sitting in my apartment staring at the patent document, trying to decide what I wanted to happen next. Revenge? Maybe. But that word felt too small, too simple. This wasn't about punishing Derek or Luxel Systems. It was about something deeper, something that had been building for years. The quiet erosion of recognition, the slow replacement of truth with convenience. I wanted them to acknowledge what they'd taken. I wanted them to understand that you can't just erase someone from a story they wrote. By midnight I'd made a decision. The next morning I called a lawyer. His name was Philip Russo, and I'd worked with him years ago during a contract negotiation with one of our early investors. He was sharp, methodical, and, most importantly, he understood intellectual property law. Liana, he said when he answered the phone. It's been a while. What can I do for you? I need help with a patent dispute, I said. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. I told him. About the patent I'd filed in 2016. About the system I'd built. About the merger announcement and the press release that credited the team, but not me. About the meeting where I'd been let go 2 hours before the deal went public. Philip didn't interrupt. He just listened, and when I finished he was quiet for a long moment. Do they know you own the patent? He asked finally. No, I said. I never brought it up. I let them use the technology without a license because I believed they'd do the right thing. But they didn't. No, I said quietly. They didn't. Philip exhaled slowly. Liana, if what you're telling me is accurate, and I have no reason to think it's not, then Luxel Systems is currently operating on technology they don't legally own. And if they've just signed a merger agreement that includes the transfer of that technology to Obelisk Health, then both companies are now exposed to significant legal and financial risk. I know, I said. This could get complicated very quickly. I know, I repeated. There was another pause. Then Philip said, what do you want to do? I want them to know, I said. I want them to know that the foundation they're building on isn't theirs. And I want them to pay for using it. All right, Philip said. Let me draft a formal notice. We'll send it to Luxel's legal team and copy Obelisk's counsel. It'll be polite, factual, and absolutely clear. They're using patented technology without authorization, and they need to address it immediately. How long will that take? I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. Do it, I said. The letter went out at 9 a.m. the next day. It was 2 pages long. No threats, no accusations, just a calm, factual statement. Asterisk. This letter serves as formal notice that the core technology underlying the Luxel Systems healthcare analytics platform is protected by active intellectual property rights held exclusively by Ms. Liana Whitaker. Patent hashtag US 10,472,839b2 covers the adaptive data processing algorithms and predictive response systems currently in use by Luxel Systems and referenced in recent public statements regarding the merger with Obelisk Health. Ms. Whitaker has not granted licensing rights for commercial use of this technology. We request immediate cessation of unauthorized use and are available to discuss licensing terms. Attached to the letter was a copy of the patent, the original filing documents and, just for good measure, a screenshot of the press release where Derek had claimed the platform as ours. By 11 a.m. my phone started ringing. The first call was from Allison Pritchard. I didn't answer. The second call was from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I played the message back, it was a lawyer from Luxel's legal department, asking me to return the call, at my earliest convenience to discuss a matter of mutual interest. I didn't call back. The third call came at 2 p.m. It was Derek. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment. Then I answered. Liana, he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice, the careful control. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. I don't think there has, I said calmly. We received a letter from your attorney this morning. It claims that you hold a patent on the core technology we've been using. That's correct. There was a pause. Liana, I don't understand. If you held a patent, why didn't you ever mention it? I did mention it, I said. It's in the system documentation. I uploaded it to the server 3 years ago. It's been there the whole time. You just never looked. I heard him exhale sharply. This is a serious claim. You understand that, right? If you're asserting ownership over the platform, that has massive implications for the merger. I know, I said. Liana, we need to talk about this. Face to face. Can you come in? No, I said. I don't work there anymore. Remember. There was a long silence. Then Derek said, his voice tight, what do you want? I want recognition, I said. I want acknowledgement. And I want fair compensation for the years I let you use my work without paying for it. We paid you a salary. You paid me to manage a team and oversee product development, I interrupted. You didn't pay me for the intellectual property. That was separate. And you never asked for a license. Derek didn't respond. Have your lawyers contact Philip Russo, I said. He'll send over the terms. Then I hung up. Hashtag the unraveling. I didn't hear from Derek again. Instead, the next communication came from a law firm I didn't recognize. A large, expensive firm that specialized in corporate defense and crisis management. They sent a letter requesting a meeting to clarify the nature of the intellectual property claims and explore potential pathways to resolution. Translation: they wanted to figure out if I was bluffing. I wasn't. Philip and I met with their team the following week in a glass-walled conference room at their downtown office. There were 4 of them, 2 senior partners, a junior associate, and someone who introduced himself as an expert in patent law. I brought Philip in the patent file. That was it. The lead partner, a man named Carter Wells, opened the meeting with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ms. Whitaker, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We're hoping we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably. That depends on what you consider amicable, Philip said evenly. Carter's smile tightened. Let's start with the basics. You're claiming ownership of the core technology used by Luxel Systems, correct? Not claiming, I said. I own it. Patent hashtag US 10,472,839b2. Filed in 2016. Active and enforceable. The patent expert leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Ms. Whitaker, I've reviewed the patent file. While it's true that you filed the application, Our understanding is that you developed this technology while employed by Luxel Systems. Under standard employment agreements, any intellectual property created during the course of employment typically belongs to the employer. Typically, Philip said, but not in this case. He slid a document across the table. This is Ms. Whitaker's original employment agreement, signed in 2014. You'll notice there's no intellectual property assignment clause. The company didn't include one because, at the time, they were too small and too disorganized to think about it. Carter picked up the document and scanned it. I watched his expression shift just slightly. The patent was also filed before Luxel Systems was even officially incorporated, Philip continued. At the time, Ms. Whitaker was working as an independent contractor, developing the technology on her own time using her own resources. She allowed the company to use it freely, but she never transferred ownership. The junior associate glanced at Carter, who set the employment agreement down carefully. Even so, Carter said, his tone measured, Ms. Whitaker allowed Luxel to use the technology for years without objection. That could be interpreted as an implied license. It could, Philip agreed. But an implied license doesn't mean perpetual, unrestricted, or transferable. And it certainly doesn't give Luxel the right to sell that technology to a third party as part of a $1.56 billion merger without compensating the actual owner. There was a long silence. Finally, the patent expert said, "What are you asking for?" Philip slid another document across the table. "These are our terms. A retroactive licensing agreement covering the past 9 years of use, calculated at a rate consistent with industry standards for proprietary technology of this type. Going forward, if Luxel and Obelisk wish to continue using the technology, they'll need to negotiate a separate licensing agreement with clearly defined terms and limitations." Carter opened the document. His eyes moved down the page and I saw the moment he reached the number at the bottom. He looked up at me. "This is significant." "So is $1.56 billion, I said quietly. He closed the document. "We'll need to discuss this with our clients." "Of course," Philip said. "But I'd encourage you to move quickly. The longer this goes unresolved, the more complicated it becomes for everyone involved." We left the meeting without shaking hands. That evening, Chloe texted me. "Chloe asterisk asterisk, I don't know what you did, but Derek has been locked in his office all afternoon. People are nervous. Asterisk." I didn't respond. I just set my phone down and poured myself a glass of wine. 2 days later, Philip called. "They want to settle," he said. "How much?" He told me. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was close. Enough to make it clear that they understood the gravity of the situation. Enough to make me feel like, for the first time in years, someone had actually looked at my name and remembered that I'd been there from the beginning. "Do we accept?" Philip asked. I thought about it for a long moment. About the years I'd spent building something I believed in. About the morning I'd walked out of that building with a cardboard box and no plan. About the way Derek had looked at me across that table and told me my position was being eliminated. "Yes," I said. "We accept." ## the aftermath. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks later. The terms were confidential, which meant I couldn't talk about the specific numbers, but I could live with that. What mattered more was the acknowledgement, quiet and buried in legal language, that I had been the creator of the technology they'd been using all along. Luxel Systems and Obelisk Health restructured the merger agreement to account for the licensing terms. The deal still went through, but at a lower valuation. Some of the board members were unhappy about it. A few investors asked pointed questions about due diligence and oversight. Derek Chamberlain resigned 6 months later. The official statement said he was pursuing other opportunities, but everyone knew what that meant. Chloe reached out to me a few weeks after the settlement was finalized. We met for coffee at the same shop where I'd read the merger announcement. "I'm leaving Luxel," she said. "I can't keep working there after everything that happened." "What will you do?" I asked. She hesitated, then said, "I was hoping you might be starting something new." "You are?" "I'd like to be part of it." I looked at her for a long moment. She was young, earnest, and still believed that doing good work mattered. I'd been like that once. Maybe I still was. "I am starting something," I said. "It's small. No guarantees. But if you're interested, I could use someone I trust." She smiled. "I'm interested." 6 months later, I filed the paperwork for a new company. I called it Whitaker Analytics. The name wasn't flashy, but it was mine, and that mattered. We started small. Just me, Chloe, and a software engineer named Leo Brennan who'd left Luxel around the same time I did. We rented a small office space, the kind with exposed brick and uneven floors, and we spent the first 3 months building a prototype for a new kind of predictive health system, one that was simpler, faster, and more transparent than anything Luxel had ever produced. We didn't have a massive budget. We didn't have investors breathing down our necks. We didn't have executives who cared more about optics than outcomes. But we had something better. We had clarity. We had purpose. And we had a system that was ours, built on ideas that no one could take away. Within a year, we signed our first client, a mid-sized hospital network that had been frustrated with Luxel's platform and wanted something more reliable. Then another. Then another. By the end of year 2, we were profitable. By year 3, we had more clients than we could handle. And Luxel? They were still around, still operating, but they'd lost their edge. The platform I'd built had started to decay, not because the code was bad, but because no one left at the company understood how it actually worked. They tried to patch it, update it, scale it, but every change introduced new problems, new failures, new gaps. Clients started leaving. Slowly at first, then faster. Some of them came to us. I didn't gloat. I didn't send smug emails or post triumphant updates on social media. I just kept building, kept refining, kept proving that the work I did mattered. Not because someone with a fancy title said so, but because it actually helped people. One afternoon, about 4 years after I'd left Luxel, I was walking through downtown Portland when I saw Derek Chamberlain across the street. He was standing outside a restaurant talking on his phone, gesturing with one hand in that familiar way he always did when he was trying to convince someone of something. He didn't see me. I could have walked past without saying anything. But I didn't. I crossed the street and stopped a few feet away from him. He glanced up and I saw the moment of recognition, the brief flicker of surprise before his expression settled into something neutral. He ended his phone call and slipped his phone into his pocket. "Liana," he said. "It's been a while." "It has," I agreed. There was a pause. He looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, maybe just something to fill the silence. But before he could speak, I said, "I wanted to tell you something." He waited. "You were right," I said. "About one thing anyway." He frowned slightly. "What's that?" "It was about fit," I said. "You told me that day in the conference room that it wasn't about performance, it was about fit. And you were right. I didn't fit at Luxel anymore. Not because I wasn't good enough, but because I'd outgrown it." Derek didn't respond. "I'm glad you let me go," I continued. "Because if you hadn't, I never would have built something that was actually mine. So thank you. For making it easy." I didn't wait for him to reply. I just turned and walked away and I didn't look back. Hashtag the legacy. 5 years after I left Luxel Systems, my company was acquired by a healthcare technology consortium for $340 million. It wasn't $1.56 billion, but it was mine. Every dollar of it. And more importantly, it was built on work that no one could take credit for except the people who'd actually done it. I didn't retire after the acquisition. I stayed on as Chief Technology Officer and I made sure that every person who'd helped build Whitaker Analytics was recognized, compensated, and given equity that actually meant something. Chloe became Director of Operations. Leo became VP of Engineering. And we hired a dozen more people who believed in what we were building, not because it was profitable, though it was, but because it mattered. I still think about that morning sometimes. The morning I walked past the conference room and heard my own words coming out of someone else's mouth. The morning I realized I'd been erased from something I'd created. It would have been easy to let that moment define me, to let the anger and betrayal consume everything that came after. But I chose something else.